Hello, and welcome to another day outside of school. It's me, I'm Philip, and in today's video, you're going to hear me have a conversation with Michelle Hinchliffe. In this video, we will talk about how unschooling feels alienating, that it can sometimes be a lonely journey. We talk about how you may be familiar with the term deschooling, but adults actually go through this process as well. You could consider it deinstitutionalizing. Some people call it like decolonizing. We talk about the two-way street of demand feeding. We talk about breastfeeding a little bit and how that's similar to other things that we talk about in unschooling, that there's a two-way street. We talk about the overdependence on parenting books, that often we're listening to too many parenting books and not listening to our own family enough, or our own, what she calls the noise of our family. And then she talks about how trusting ourselves takes courage, which I think is a really important thing for us to consider. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Michelle Hinchliffe. Welcome back to the Schools Out podcast. I'm sitting here with Michelle Hinchliffe, and Michelle is a home educating parent of a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old. And her kids started out in formal education, but she withdrew her eldest at the age of 8. So they've been home educating formally for 6 years. And Michelle didn't start out unschooling, but moved towards it through observing her kids, seemed to learn through, I think I missed something up here. You didn't start unschooling, but moved towards it through observing how her kids seem to learn, and is really focusing on deschooling herself. And I'm definitely going to want to ask her about what she means by deschooling. I'm familiar with the term, but maybe some people aren't. So Michelle, thanks so much for sitting with this American dad over here and across the pond, and sharing some of your insights and wisdom today.
No pressure then. I can certainly share my experiences.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's wisdom right there, to know that we enter a conversation and that we don't necessarily have any insights, although we hope that people can glean insight from it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I want to start with you. Maybe start with what drew you to reach out? We've interacted, I think, a few times on Twitter,
Yeah.
but start with that, or just what do you feel like talking about in terms of this conversation today?
I guess like in terms of how we connected through Twitter, yeah, I don't really like, I see that you use Twitter in a way that, you talk about home education and education sort of as the main, and parenting as the kind of main focus. I use it in a different way for sort of other work type stuff, but it's
Mhm.
kind of spilt into, because I've seen your posts and different people, and I've been like, people out there home educating, and I've sort of started to follow a few different people like yourself. Um, so yeah, I guess for me, in my own personal journey, aside from being a parent, I'm just at a stage in my life where I'm really finding my voice and wanting to speak up about my experiences. And
Mm.
I guess with home education, when I started, I didn't find that easy, because it
Mm.
was, I don't know what your community's like where you are, but it was like a big deal to do it where I was. I didn't know anybody that did it. It was really starting from zero. And so I found it quite difficult to talk about in those early days, because, I didn't have allies. I didn't have people around me who were like on that journey. initially. I was breaking away from sort of mainstream education with my kids, and
Mhm.
so I was having to sort of explain myself to the people who were within the system. Um, and it was hard, because, yeah, I think it can feel like an indictment to people who are sending their children to school. It can be an indictment of their choice almost, because you're just saying, I don't want to do that for my kids.
Yeah.
So I found it kind of difficult to talk about. And obviously, over the years, I've connected with loads of different home educating families,
Mhm.
and, found people that even within home education, there's a variety of approaches. So even within that community, there's still not that many people that I would say that, yeah, we are kind of on the same page with how we do this and how we approach it. So, um, anyway, to go back to what I said, I'm at a point where I'm just done with, I just want to speak my truth and, stand strong in it. And that goes for how I live with, my kids and how we do things here, as well as my own sort of personal life journey too, if that makes sense.
It does. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's and it aligns with a lot of the things that we've experienced as a family. We've been practicing self-directed learning since our oldest was we only had one child at the time. He was one, and it's alienating. Now we have three, and you notice that your spheres of community just start to shift, because you find that you just no longer fit in the same world as other people, and you start to see things they do in a different way, and it's just like i just I have no interest in, like, there's 7 billion people on the planet. Oh, I don't have to choose to spend my time with this person. And it's not that you dislike them anymore, it's just it's just, you just don't have anything in common anymore. So some of that has been painful for us, and isolating, and it sounds like you've had some similar experiences.
Yeah.
um, you chose to talk about you chose to include deschooling in your bio, which I find really interesting because it's something that so many of us who have gone through the education system never even engage in. And
Mm.
I like that you're recognizing that you're going through that, that it's not just a child that goes through it if they've been in school, but adults go through this in big ways. Can you talk with me, um, as long as you want, about what that experience has been like, and what's going on there?
Sure. I guess there's probably definitions out there of what deschooling is, but for me, it has been this sort of process over time of dismantling my own ideas about what education looks like based on my own upbringing, which was very, it was just a state school, typical, standard education experience. So, yeah, when I first started to home educate, I came across the term in the literature a little bit, and you can sort of have a rudimentary understanding of what that means, but the lived reality of it has been something much more um, challenging and
Mm.
deep, and it's an ongoing process. I don't think it'll ever end. There's just constantly things where I mean, I'd have to say, I suppose, in the time that I've been home educating, in the 6 years, it's second nature now for me to question my assumptions about things. Whereas at the start, you don't even know you're not even living in conscious awareness of the assumptions that you have. And so there's a process of bringing that to consciousness and then thinking critically about it and deconstructing it and then sort of letting it go. And that's kind of what deschooling has been for me. And I think, when I took the kids, well, I say the kids, my son didn't make it to school because he was 5 when we made this choice. But when we made that decision, I didn't realize how much work that I would have to do in terms of myself. Like, I just thought, yeah,
Yeah.
we'll be around the kitchen table, we'll be doing crafts. I had this really sort of idealistic version of what home education would be, and we'd be out doing things, and like, yeah, that's that was like that was just la la land, because that's not what it was like at all. Like,
Yeah.
I mean, I like doing that stuff, but my
Mhm.
kids didn't necessarily always want to do it. One wanted to do it more than the other one, and that was all about me. So um yeah, it's really like it's like a radical kind of surrender of everything you
Mhm.
thought you knew. And if you can embrace that, then I think that's where the real kind of shift comes, and you can really be open and alive to what you see right in front of you with your children every day, and how it changes. And that, yeah, that's really in a nutshell what my journey has been with it, and what deschooling has been to me is just it's the sort of letting go of everything I thought I knew about education.
Yeah. You were talking about the I can't remember how you said it. It's just this process of like just becoming aware of all your assumptions and then eventually letting some of those go. And I know that from my experience, it's not that we let everything go that we live in, but um, it's like we learn what is truly worth holding on to,
Hmm.
or at least for that time. And I can remember we have a practice in our home where we've decided to just not try to force the kids to pick up after themselves. Everyone's, I mean, we ask them to help sometimes, but the way we've gone about it in order to help us maintain a positive disposition towards them is we've just created a much more minimal space. So we limit the number of toys and objects that are even out because as we're the ones putting them away, we thought to ourselves, if we are angry or resent them for not wanting to help, then that is our responsibility to take care of. It's not their job. It's not their job to make sure that we don't resent them. It's our job to create an environment and understand our own limits. So anytime that we just got frustrated with how many toys were about, we put some of them away for a while. And we thought that the kids would really like rebel against that and be like, why'd you put that away? They they never notice. I mean, once we put it away and then we would do what we call toy rotations. Our kids are still really little. The oldest is 7. So when we
Hmm.
do toy rotations, we put something away, and normally they have a say in that process. And then we get something new out, and then it's kind of like they got a new toy.
Yeah.
And our cleanup every day only lasts about 10-15 minutes tops
Mm.
across 3 different rooms. Um, and so that's been I'm losing my train of thought of like, why did I bring that up? um, oh, so the when I was getting frustrated because my son wasn't helping and I really wanted him to. And I just paused and I breathed for a moment and I asked myself, is this more about the chore or is it about the relationship?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
in that moment, I had to pick one.
Hmm.
And I realized I'm almost always 99% of the time, I'm going to go with the relationship. And I'm sure
Absolutely.
you've heard the same challenge I've heard sometimes like, well, what about when they run in the street? It's like, yeah, that's the time because if they're dead, we don't have a relationship. So that's the time that I do grab against their will and say, there's, or if they're, trying to swing a knife around, yeah,
Yeah.
there are certain times where it's like, no, the relationship is not more important than this.
But they're pretty few and far between, though. You give some
Absolutely.
really like extreme examples, but I think if we model kindness, compassion, self-responsibility, then our kids see that, and they don't run about with knives, and they don't run onto the road. It doesn't,
Yeah.
I mean, that's a very sort of one-dimensional take on it, but I do think that, yeah, there will be always the outlier experiences where you do have to go against what you would usually do. But I completely agree that, um, in terms of that experience of being a parent, I just know when I feel that tension now in the relationship with either one of my children, I have to stop and say, what is it about this? Because it's never about
Mhm.
the task itself. It is about something to do with what you think should be happening, and then what that represents to you. Does it represent respect, or does it represent self-responsibility or organization, like things that you want your children to have? But rarely does, never pushing that point, like, so that the relationship suffers, is never the best way to go.
Mhm.
So yeah, I think, like, when you were talking about your sort of managing the clear ups, and your children are obviously younger than mine, and I can remember that feeling of, you want to have this house where everyone mucks in from, the moment they're born, like everyone's just, and probably like me, you've read about, different cultures where children are much more actively participating in the
Mhm.
sort of management of the environment that you live in, and it's so different from like this culture in the West that we have now for our children. And so I did have this idea, this idea that I want them to muck in, I want them to grow up to be responsible, but at the same time, there is a level of age appropriateness, like that
Mhm.
it will get easier. And I remember reading on some sort of forum years ago about this very thing, about, because when you're at home, obviously you generate a lot of mess over the day, more
Yeah.
than if everyone's out. So it's
Life
a
is
thing.
messy.
Yeah, maybe more so if you're home educating. So, but I remember reading a more experienced home educator saying, that whole battle to get them to pick up their stuff, I just decided, like, to leave it. And as they get
Mhm.
older, they get it, they do it, they're more
Yeah.
physically capable, mentally aware. So it's just knowing the time where it is the time to sort of say gently, you can do this now, and I think it's time. But before that, why? And
Yeah.
also another thing that occurred to me when you were talking about that is, the adaptation that you made about the toys, and just putting out like less toys to sort of mitigate against this massive job at the end of the day. And it reminds me so much of the breastfeeding relationship that, I had with
Mm.
my kids, which is, I remember when people would talk about demand feeding, we feed on demand, and I would be like, right, okay. But I remember someone saying to me, it's actually on your demand as well. It's like a two-way street. So it's not
Mm.
simply being available for when the baby needs fed, although that is obviously part of it. But there is the time where maybe they're not that fussed about having a feed, but you're about to go out and catch a bus. So you just like give them, offer.
Yeah.
And if they take it, then
Mm.
that's kind of on your terms a bit more, but it manages the day much better. So it's about that tension back and forth with your child about what's right for them and what's right for you too, and that starts from a very, very early age. So I
Well, and
see
I've
that. I see that with what you're talking about with the toys. It's like,
Mhm.
this, we're staking our side of things too, and we can meet in the middle still. It doesn't have to all be your way or mine.
Yeah, and so that does connect. I definitely see the connection there, and we had trouble breastfeeding with all three of our kids. We bottle fed all three of them, but I know that a lot of women experience pain in their breasts when, as the breast fills with milk, and so I could even see that as a reason of like, well, she's awake and she's happy, but my breasts are hurting. Like,
Yeah.
let's see if she's a little bit hungry, and because some babies just aren't as fussy when they're hungry, especially if they have, if their body's just working well, and They won't
But
cry every time.
even in, bottle feeding wasn't my experience, but I can still say with the example that I gave where, you offer to,
That's
because
true.
you can demand feed, whether it's breast or bottle, obviously, but you could still offer to feed them whether it's breast or bottle, because you're about to go out and you don't want them to
Yeah.
get hungry on the trip. So, it's just that same sort of mentality about, how do we meet each other in the middle, which, is from the moment the baby's born.
Yeah, that's interesting. Awesome. I'm glad we ended up talking about that. And so much of that circles back to deschooling. Like you're less likely to be aware of that unless you're also going through a deschooling process, which is becoming more aware of the culture you're in, the environment, and your own assumptions about life. I think,
Yeah. And I think for me, what was really in my sort of story of how I got here with my kids, I've got two children, and the first one was born in hospital in a sort of typically medically managed birth.
Mhm.
And it was very unsatisfactory for me, although it was classified as normal, but it really led me into the sort of literature afterwards about how did I lose all my power? Why was that not the way I wanted it to be? And I was very aware of the power of institutions through that experience. And then when I was pregnant with my second child, I knew I wanted to have a home birth that time because I'd educated myself to the point where I thought, I think I get how this works and I want to do it differently this time. And that was a really positive experience for me. And I actually didn't have a baby through the NHS. I had an independent midwife. I know it's really different for you in America. Like I don't even know what the rules are in your state. Like I know it's really varied, but you can have a baby at home with an independent midwife in Scotland, and I was lucky enough to do that, and I had a really really positive experience. And so when I had set off in the path of sort of mainstream education, and it was becoming increasingly unsatisfactory for me and for my eldest, that gave me the courage to think, well, no, you've actually like stepped out of this machine before, and it worked out really well for you. So like I took that learning from that and applied it to what was happening with education, and it gave me the courage to sort of do my own thing again. And definitely with unschooling as well, I'd say the experience of having a baby in my own terms and trusting my instincts and all of that, definitely it really maps onto this, unschooling experience now as well, if that makes sense.
yeah, it totally does. And that actually leads to one of the questions I wanted to ask about is because I talked to a lot of homeschoolers that have a similar experience that they actually they didn't know what it was called, but they kind of entered a period of deschooling or deinstitutionalizing, if you want to think of it in those terms. And then that led them down a path of more self-directed and unschooling. Um, so if you were to meet someone who was really nervous or worried about having a child, maybe they're having their first child, maybe
Mm.
they're trying to wait and plan out their family a little differently. What story would you share with them?
I mean, if I'm thinking what is the message that I would like to get across is to trust your instincts always, always.
Mhm.
But I think that I mean, life doesn't work this way, but if we could choose, then we would do our own psychological, emotional work before we become parents, and then
Mhm.
be led by our instincts, because our levels of self-trust would be optimal. And so we wouldn't be swayed by different bits of advice from people and books and institutions. We would just be able to tune in to what's really true for us. So I guess, but then it's hard to kind of, my own individual journey as a human being in this planet, it's hard to separate that obviously from being a parent, because it's been so integral to it. And a lot of my own healing has taken place because of the triggers that my children have given me, you know, of the sort of things that I've found difficult, is because it's bringing up stuff from my own childhood that was difficult for me. And I don't think I could be as whole as I am just now had I not been a parent. So it's difficult, you know. How can any of us know how our children are going to push our buttons in order that we grow? I mean, every parent is committed to their children, obviously, but when you make the decision to home educate, everything is kind of like, it's all a big mishmash, you know. There's not this separation of school out there and home, and within that, it's difficult to have space. But I would just really encourage parents to not be afraid to do their own work, because, you know, I think we can end up thinking that we must self-sacrifice in order for our children to be happy. But actually that's the wrong way around, because when we make ourselves happy, our children will be happy anyway because of that. And I don't mean in a way where we neglect them to pursue our own interests, you know, to the nth degree, but we have to model what being a passionate, curious, you know, human being looks like for them, in order for them to see that that's what they can grow into, not a put upon, resentful slave, you know, to the to the home and the child. So yeah, I guess that's my biggest lessons in this journey, is that I mean, it's easier for me to sit here. I've got a 14-year-old and an 11-year-old, you know. I've been through a lot of stuff with them now.
Yeah. And a lot of
Like,
self-work through that process.
yeah, absolutely. Work that would have had to been done had I not become a parent, but it was certainly more oppressing, or more essential, because I was a parent, you know.
I think this is what the deschooling process is for. But how do we separate our instincts from the cultural norms? You know, because it's like we live in this culture, and our instincts really come from our cultural norms in a lot of ways. Like when we say we kind of trust our gut, you know, my instinct was to be authoritarian. I don't believe that that's my human instinct. I think that's a cultural instinct that I had. And so and maybe you don't have a great answer for it. You know, it's something I'm continuously reflecting on, because I know that so many parents do just trust their gut. But what happens when, you know, just like a tree planted in the forest, if the gut comes from the ground and the ground is toxic, then I become toxic just like the ground that I'm planted in. You know, how do I recognize that my gut has been distorted or poisoned in some way because of the environment that I'm in? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's not got an easy answer. I suppose when I hear you say trust my instinct, I think actually what you mean, in a way, is your conditioned response, you know, from the culture that you're in, as opposed to what is deeply resonant with you. Because I know when my eldest child was a baby, you know, and we were floundering new parents and had so much conflicting advice. Oh my goodness, instinct. But I know that when I was, you know, like, just, my baby was crying a lot, and so people said, "Oh, give the baby a dummy," you know, or a pacifier, I think you call them. And I'm like, well, I don't really think that's good, and but you know, there's pressure on to do it, and I would tried it, and like the baby wouldn't take it. But on some deep level, I I knew it didn't feel right, but I didn't have the courage to trust that because I felt the pressure of expectation and a lack of confidence. So again, I just go back to this. If we're deeply connected to our truest, authentic self, and if we live with authenticity, then I think that, it's like people who are violent and they go and punch people in the face. I don't believe their conscience allows them to think that that's okay. Not really. I think on some level that they're disconnected from in a lot of ways. It feels bad to do that. It does feel bad. So I do think that every human being has the potential to connect with what is really true, which is, compassion, humility, and openness. And like, we all want connection. Fundamentally, beings, we seek connection. And so when we act in ways as parents that damage that, then on some visceral level we feel it and it doesn't feel good. And it's just having the courage to be able to connect with that and honor that, whatever form that takes, even if it's culturally unusual or, does that make sense?
Yeah. And like you said, there's no easy answer. And I think the unschooling community does a good job of kind of standing against advisors who say there are easy answers, because we're all different. There may be some principles that link us together, but we need different things in our lives. So, yeah. I think the last question I want to explore with you is, what question do you wish people would ask more about parenting?
How can I help you? What do you need?
Explain that more. Is that a question to the child, or is it a question to another parent?
It's the question I wish people would have asked me when my kids were younger, for sure. How can I help you? What do you need?
Not here's how I can help you. Do what I say.
No.
Because that's what it normally is, right? It's like you get a barrage of unsolicited advice from other parents.
I know, and I have to resist the urge now that my children are a bit older not to be that person, 'cause it's easy to go, oh yeah, I remember when. But each family and each journey that a child and a parent makes is unique, and as you rightly said, you can share a story to illustrate a bit of learning you've had, but that's different from offering absolutes and unsolicited advice to other parents, which is never helpful, really. It gets in the way of that instinct thing that I'm talking about. The more voices, and this is really true of being an unschooler as well. I enjoy books and I enjoy hearing about other people's opinions and things and research, but I really, over the years, I've just stepped away from that because it drowns out the noise of my own instinct and what I see with my own children. So I noticed that you had tweeted a couple of times about Alfie Kohn, and I did actually read that book, Punished by Reward, a couple of years ago. But I just try, and I enjoyed it, and I do agree with a lot of it, but I just try and keep a bit of silence around me so that I can just concentrate on what is my family and what do we need for us, if that makes sense.
I love that. I'm going to go back to what you were saying about the instinct and the question about how can I help you. There's a message implicit in that question, which is, how can I help your instincts, basically. But if I'm giving you unsolicited advice, implicit in that message is don't trust your instincts.
Yeah.
So if I'm saying, Michelle, I know that you have more experience than me, but here's something you really need to think about as your oldest turns 15.
Mm.
I'm saying to you, I'm implying, don't trust your instincts next year.
Mhm.
This is a disease in America. I call it the just wait till. You might have that up in your region, but it's like every parent you talk to who has even a day's more experience than you will say, just wait till they do this. Just wait till they're 10. Just wait till they want to wear skirts. Just wait till they start dating. I mean, it's just like,
I know.
I don't think I can keep my eyes from rolling when I hear parents say
I
that.
know.
It is the worst. And it's kind of like this one-upsmanship. Are you familiar with that term? It's just
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
oh, I know your life is rough, but just get a load of this.
I know, I know, and I think I was very conscious of that thing you described as my eldest child approached, 13, the start of the teenage years official. And, people with older children say, oh, wait till they're teenagers.
Yeah.
That's the big one.
Yeah.
And even when the kids were little, and people say, oh, you think it's bad just now when you've not slept for about 3 years, and they'll say, wait till they're a teenager. And you just think, oh my God, how bad is this going to get?
It's like
Yeah,
it's like the conversation is like the parenting is just a conveyor belt to more suffering. Like you're just going into hell more and more. It's like you think it's bad, it's going to get even worse. It's like, is this really a healthy way to look at parenting?
no,
Doesn't feel like it. But
yeah,
I kind of want to end the conversation and re-enunciate something you said, because I'm going to have to sit with this for a while, is trying to remove some of the noise and
mm,
make room for our own instincts. And really, it's almost like a prayer
yeah,
to really think about and take in all that's happening in my own family. And it's not that reading books is bad and research studies and watching YouTube videos is bad, but I need to balance that with spending time with my kids and just thinking about, what do we need as a family? Where do all of us want to go? Not even because I have that tendency as a man, to think that I need to be the visionary of the family, that I need to lead. It's important that all of us know where each of us want to go.
yeah,
And if I'm just listening to where I want to go, or if I'm just listening to Alfie Kohn, and I think Alfie Kohn would actually reverberate that. He'd say, yes, you absolutely shouldn't just read
yeah,
my book.
yeah,
You should, look at what your kids need and pay attention to what they think they need.
yeah.
So I really love that, Michelle. You
Mhm.
did deliver some insight and some wisdom that I think anyone who listens can really think on. So I appreciate that. So is there anywhere that, if people want, connected with part of our conversation and want to reach out to you, is there a good place to do that, so that I can include that kind of in the show notes?
I guess you can send them to my Twitter account. I mean, I don't tweet a lot about home education or
Gotcha.
parenting, but um, I suppose I do tweet about what it is to be a human. So if that's
Yeah,
your thing, then yeah, you can put that on. That's cool.
that's great. Well, thanks again for sitting down and having this conversation. And I've got some new things to think about. I can't wait to share this with other people.
Thank you.
I hope that was enjoyable for you, that you got something out of it. If you have thoughts or want to say something differently, feel free to leave something in the comments. And don't stay in school.